for car doors, for distinct thuds echoing in my driveway that Sunday afternoon in July. I still remember that sound, the way it seemed to announce my growing frustration before I even saw their faces. Through my kitchen window, I watched Rachel climb out of her beat-up Honda, followed by her parents Frank and Gloria, and her 16-year-old daughter Zoe from her first marriage. Not a single covered dish. Not one grocery bag. Not even a pack of paper plates. For the third family gathering in a row. My hands tightened around the dish towel as I watched them approach my back gate, empty-handed and smiling like they owned the place. Behind me, the dining room table groaned under the weight of food I'd spent 2 days preparing. Homemade biscuits still warm from the oven. My grandmother's 6-hour baked bean recipe that I'd started before dawn. Corn casserole, potato salad, and 3 different desserts because I never knew what people would want. "Mom, they're here." David's voice carried through the screen door, that forced cheerfulness he used when he sensed trouble brewing. He was out back manning the grill, sweat beading on his forehead as he tended to the chicken I'd been marinating since 6 a.m. "This is my son we're talking about. My David, who I raised to understand that you don't show up anywhere empty-handed. Especially not to family gatherings where someone has been cooking for days." But here they were again, Rachel, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, and her family, arriving like guests at a restaurant instead of contributors to a family meal. Rachel was 42, a decade older than my 32-year-old son, with laugh lines that suggested a woman who'd weathered her share of storms. She'd married David after a whirlwind romance that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my boy's judgment. Not because she was older, love is love, but because she felt like a stranger trying to navigate our family traditions with the awkward uncertainty of someone who'd never learned the steps. Her parents, Frank and Gloria, were retired factory workers who carried themselves with careful politeness. The kind of people who said please and thank you for everything, but never quite seemed comfortable accepting kindness. And then there was Zoe, Rachel's daughter from her first marriage. A typical teenager glued to her phone, but with moments of surprising sweetness that reminded me why David had fallen for this complicated family package. "Martha, everything smells incredible," Rachel said as they filed through my gate, her embrace feeling genuine despite my simmering resentment. "Thank you so much for having us," Gloria added, her voice soft with what sounded like real gratitude. "Frank's been talking about your potato salad all week." I forced warmth into my smile, but inside, frustration churned like storm clouds. It wasn't just about the food, though Lord knows I'd spent enough money and time preparing it. It was about feeling taken for granted. About the basic courtesy my late husband Tom and I had drilled into David from childhood. You contribute. You participate. You don't just show up and expect others to provide everything. As we settled around my back patio table, I watched the familiar dance begin. David served generous portions to everyone, his easy laugh filling the spaces between conversations. Frank and Gloria praised every dish with the enthusiasm of people who rarely experience such abundance. Zoe picked at her phone between bites, occasionally looking up to compliment something I'd made. But Rachel barely touched her food, kept checking her phone with a worried expression that made David ask, "Everything okay, honey?" "Just work stuff," she replied quickly, sliding the phone back into her pocket with a tight smile. The afternoon progressed like all the others, pleasant on the surface, but with an undercurrent of tension that no one acknowledged. I served my famous peach cobbler for dessert, accepted compliments graciously, and watched my son play the perfect host to people who seemed to think family meals materialized out of thin air. As they prepared to leave, loaded down with containers of leftovers I'd insisted they take, I caught a whispered conversation between Frank and Gloria by the car. "We should have brought something," Frank muttered. "I feel terrible." "You know we couldn't," Gloria whispered back. "Not after the mortgage payment." They didn't know I could hear them. And in that moment, I felt the first crack in my certainty about what was really going on. But I had no idea that this frustrating pattern I'd been judging so harshly was actually hiding something that would change everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law and her family. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued, but with subtle changes that I couldn't quite put my finger on. At my nephew's graduation party, Rachel's family arrived with warm smiles and empty hands once again. But this time, I noticed Frank gripping Gloria's arm a little too tightly when my sister Betty made a comment about everyone contributing to the potluck. Some people just weren't raised right, Betty whispered to me later, loud enough for others to hear. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from something else I couldn't name. Why was I suddenly defending people whose behavior had been bothering me for months? The next incident happened at my book club meeting. Linda Morrison, who lived 2 streets over, mentioned seeing Rachel at the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon. She was standing in the cereal aisle for the longest time, Linda said, lowering her voice like she was sharing classified information. Just staring at prices, putting things back in her cart, then taking them out again. Looked like she was about to cry over a box of cornflakes. The other women nodded knowingly, but something twisted in my stomach. I'd done that same dance in grocery stores during the lean years after Tom's first heart attack, when his medical bills ate into our savings, and I had to choose between name brand and generic everything. 2 days later, I experienced something that should have been my first real clue. I was coming home from my doctor's appointment, routine blood pressure check, when I saw Rachel's Honda parked in Mrs. Chen's driveway next door. Nothing unusual about that. Mrs. Chen was 87 and always appreciated visitors. But as I pulled into my garage, I noticed Rachel wasn't visiting Mrs. Chen at all. She was in my backyard. I walked around the side of my house and found her kneeling by my tomato garden, carefully staking up plants that had been knocked over by the previous night's storm. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, guilt flashing across her face. "Oh, Martha, I hope you don't mind. I saw the damage when I was just..." She stumbled over her words, clearly flustered. "I brought coffee." She gestured to a cup sitting on my patio table, my favorite hazelnut blend from the coffee shop downtown. "You didn't need to do that," I said, though I was touched by the gesture. "I know, I just thought, how did your appointment go?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't mentioned the appointment to anyone except David, and he was at work. How did she know? "Fine," I said slowly. "Just routine." She nodded, relief visible in her posture. "Good. That's good." She finished with the tomatoes and gathered her gardening gloves. "I should get going. Zoe has soccer practice." After she left, I sat on my patio sipping the coffee she'd brought, staring at my perfectly staked tomato plants. The coffee was expensive, at least $5 from that boutique place. Not the kind of splurge someone makes casually, especially someone who seemed to be watching every penny. That evening, David called during his dinner break at the fire station. "Mom, Rachel mentioned she stopped by today. Thanks for being nice to her." "Why wouldn't I be nice?" "Come on, Mom. I know you've been frustrated about the potluck thing. She feels it too." I wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped me. "David, is everything okay with Rachel's family?" A pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is there something I should know? Frank seems stressed lately." "Mom, it's not my place to," he stopped himself. "Look, everyone's dealing with their own stuff, okay? Just try to be patient." After we hung up, I found myself thinking about patterns within patterns. Rachel's unexpected visits that always seemed to coincide with days I'd been feeling unwell. The expensive coffee when she claimed money was tight. The way Frank's hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. The breaking point came the following Sunday at my grandnephew's birthday party. Once again, Rachel's family arrived empty-handed, but this time, I watched more carefully. Frank avoided eye contact with the other men when they talked about their jobs. Gloria complimented every single dish, with an intensity that felt almost desperate. Rachel kept checking her phone with increasing anxiety, and when David asked about it, she snapped at him, something I'd never seen her do before. But it was Zoe who gave me the biggest clue. While the adults were distracted, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "No, I can't go to the movies tonight. Mom gave me her last 20 for school lunch money this week, and Grandpa would die if he knew." She paused, listening. "Yeah, I know it sucks, but Mom's doing her best. She's working double shifts just to keep Grandpa from finding out about the house." The house? What about the house? That night, I made a decision. I was going to figure out what was really going on with my daughter-in-law's family, because something told me that those empty hands might be carrying a much heavier burden than I'd ever imagined. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to Rachel's workplace. She worked as a medical assistant at Dr. Peterson's family practice, the same clinic where I'd been taking David for checkups since he was 5. I told myself I was just stopping by to schedule my annual physical, but really, I wanted to observe Rachel in her natural environment. The waiting room was busy, but through the reception window, I could see Rachel moving between exam rooms with efficient grace. She smiled at every patient, her voice warm and professional, but I noticed the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Mrs. Patterson?" The receptionist called my name, and I realized I'd been staring. "Actually, I need to reschedule," I said quickly, feeling foolish. "I'll call later." But as I turned to leave, I heard Dr. Peterson's voice from behind the desk. "Rachel, you sure you can't stay late tonight? I know you've been pulling doubles, but Mrs. Garcia specifically requested you for her daughter's appointment." "I can stay," Rachel replied without hesitation. "Zoe can get herself home from school. Double shifts." Just like Zoe had mentioned on the phone. My next stop was the public library. If I was going to play detective, I might as well do it properly. I asked the librarian to help me access public records on my computer, something about property taxes that I claimed to need for my own house. What I actually searched for was Frank and Gloria's address. The records painted a troubling picture. Their modest ranch house, purchased in 1987, had been refinanced 3 times in the past 5 years. The most recent refinancing was just 8 months ago, right around the time Frank would have been laid off. I sat in the library parking lot, staring at the printouts, feeling like I was violating their privacy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that understanding their situation might help me understand Rachel's behavior. That afternoon, I did something even more out of character. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chin. "Helen, you know I don't like to gossip," I began, which was only partially true, but I'm worried about Rachel. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" Mrs. Chin, who missed nothing from her front window perch, was happy to share. "Oh yes, dear. She's been coming by quite regularly. Always brings me something coffee, a magazine, sometimes just sits and chats. But Martha, I think she's been checking on you too." "What do you mean?" "Well, she always parks in my driveway, but I see her walking around your house first. Checking your mailbox, looking at your windows. Last week when you had that dizzy spell and didn't come out for your morning paper, she was the one who called David." My blood ran cold. "How do you know about my dizzy spell?" "Because she came to my door asking if I had a key to your house. Said she'd been calling and you weren't answering. When David couldn't leave work right away, she sat on your porch for 2 hours until you woke up from your nap." The memory came flooding back, Rachel appearing at my door that Tuesday with coffee and a concerned smile. I'd been lying on my kitchen floor for 20 minutes, too dizzy and weak to get up, when I heard her key in the lock. A key I'd assumed David had given her without asking me. "Mrs. Chin, how long has Rachel been checking on me?" "Oh, months now. Ever since your health scare last year. She's very discreet about it, but I notice these things." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the spot where I'd fallen that Tuesday morning. Rachel had found me. Rachel had been watching over me, quietly, without ever making me feel like a burden or an obligation. But why hadn't she told me? And why was she struggling financially while spending money on expensive coffee for me? That evening, I called my sister Betty, who worked part-time at the unemployment office. Betty, I need you to do me a favor, and I need you to not ask questions. Martha, what's gotten into you? Can you look up someone's unemployment benefits? Unofficially, she sighed. You know I could get in trouble for that. It's important. 20 minutes later, she called back. Frank Morrison, that's Rachel's father, right? His benefits ran out 3 months ago. He was eligible for an extension, but he never applied. Some people are too proud, you know. They'd rather struggle than admit they need help. The pieces were falling into place, but I still didn't have the complete picture. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to follow Rachel. The next evening, I parked across the street from the medical clinic and waited for Rachel's shift to end. I felt ridiculous, a 68-year-old woman playing private investigator, but I needed answers. At 7:30 p.m., Rachel emerged from the building, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Instead of heading toward her apartment, she drove to the grocery store. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding like I was committing a crime. Inside the store, I grabbed a cart and pretended to shop while watching Rachel navigate the aisles. What I witnessed broke my heart. She moved through the store with a list, checking prices on everything. In the cereal aisle, the same one Linda Morrison had mentioned, I watched her pick up a box of name-brand cornflakes, check the price, then put it back and grab the generic version. She did this with item after item, choosing the cheapest pasta, the marked-down meat, the day-old bread. But then she did something that made my chest tighten. She picked up a bag of expensive coffee beans, the same hazelnut blend she'd been bringing me, and put it in her cart without checking the price. At the checkout, I positioned myself 2 lanes over and watched her count out exact change, mostly in 1s and 5s. The total came to $47.83. The coffee alone had cost $12.99. She was spending a quarter of her grocery budget on coffee for me. After she left, I abandoned my cart and drove straight to David's apartment. I found him on his couch, still in his work uniform, looking exhausted after a double shift at the fire station. Mom, what are you doing here so late? David, I need you to tell me the truth about Rachel's family. All of it. He looked at me for a long moment, then rubbed his face with both hands. Mom, sit down. Frank lost his job 8 months ago, he began. Not just laid off, the whole plant closed. 43 years he worked there, and they gave him 2 weeks' notice. I sank into his armchair, the weight of my assumptions crushing down on me. Their house is in foreclosure. Has been for 3 months. Frank's too proud to tell anyone, including Rachel, but Gloria called her crying one night. That's when Rachel started working double shifts. David, why didn't you tell me? Because Rachel made me promise not to. She said Frank would be humiliated if he knew people were talking about their business. And Mom. He paused, looking uncomfortable. She was afraid you'd judge them even more harshly if you knew they were struggling. The irony hit me like a physical blow. I had been judging them harshly, but for all the wrong reasons. There's more, David continued. Rachel's been sending them money every month. Not just helping, she's basically supporting them. That's why she can't afford to bring food to family gatherings. She's choosing between contributing to potlucks and keeping her in-laws from losing their house. I thought about the expensive coffee, the careful way she'd staked my tomatoes, the dark circles under her eyes. And the checking on me? David's expression softened. Mom, when you had those dizzy spells last year, Rachel was terrified something would happen to you when no one was around. She organized this whole system. Calling Aunt Betty, coordinating with Cousin Jim, driving by the house during her lunch breaks. She never told you because she didn't want you to feel like you were being watched or pitted. She found me that Tuesday morning. She'd been calling all morning when you didn't answer. She was so scared that she used the emergency key I'd given her. She stayed with you until I could get there, then made up that story about bringing coffee so you wouldn't feel embarrassed about needing help. I sat in silence, processing the magnitude of my misunderstanding. Rachel hadn't been taking advantage of our family, she'd been quietly taking care of it. While I'd been resenting her empty hands, she'd been filling them with acts of service I'd been too blind to see. David, how long has this been going on? The financial stuff? Since Frank lost his job. But the taking care of you? Since the day we got married. She said you raised the man she loves, so you're her responsibility too. That night, I drove home through streets blurred by tears I couldn't stop. I'd spent months judging a woman who was sacrificing her own comfort to care for her family and mine. A woman who showed up empty-handed to gatherings because her hands were already full, holding up everyone she loved. The next morning, I drove to Rachel's apartment before she left for work. My hands shook as I knocked on her door, clutching a thermos of coffee I'd made, the expensive hazelnut blend I'd bought on my way over. Rachel answered in her scrubs, clearly surprised to see me at 7 a.m. Martha? Is everything okay? Are you feeling all right? Even now, her first concern was for my well-being. Rachel, we need to talk. She invited me in, and I looked around her small apartment with new eyes. The furniture was secondhand, but clean and well-maintained. Zoe's school photos covered the refrigerator alongside honor roll certificates. Everything was neat, organized, and clearly lived in by people who took care of what they had. I know, I said simply. Know what? But her face had already gone pale. About your father's job. About the house. About the money you've been sending them. I paused, watching her sink into a chair. About how you've been taking care of me. Rachel's composure crumbled. Martha, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything. I need to apologize. For the next hour, we talked like we never had before. Rachel told me about the sleepless nights worrying about her parents, about Frank's depression since losing his job, about Gloria's attempts to stretch their social security to cover the mortgage. I wanted to contribute to the family gatherings, she said, tears streaming down her face. Every time we showed up empty-handed, I died a little inside. But between helping my parents and Zoe's school expenses, there just wasn't room in the budget for extra groceries. Rachel, why didn't you tell me? Because every time I try to help my parents directly, Dad gets angry. Says they're not charity cases. The only way I can get him to accept anything is if it comes through family gatherings where he feels like an honored guest, not a recipient. The pieces finally clicked into place. That's why you keep coming. It's not about the free food. It's about giving your parents a place where they can feel normal. She nodded. And I was so afraid you'd think less of them if you knew they were struggling. Dad's pride is everything to him. 43 years at that plant, never missed a day, never asked for help from anyone. I reached across her small kitchen table and took her hands. Rachel, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my gratitude. For what? For taking care of my son. For taking care of me. For showing me what real family looks like. That afternoon, I did something I should have done months ago. I called Frank directly. Frank, it's Martha. I was wondering if you'd help me with something. Of course, Martha. What do you need? I'm planning a big family barbecue next weekend, and I could really use a hand with the grilling. David's working a double shift, and you know how men are. They think they're the only ones who can handle a grill properly. I heard him chuckle. I'd be happy to help. Wonderful. And Frank? Would you mind bringing that coleslaw recipe your mother used to make? Rachel mentioned it once, and I've been dying to try it. The silence stretched long enough that I worried I'd overstepped. Then, I think I can manage that. Perfect. Oh, and Frank? This is between us, but I'm paying you for the grilling. It's a big job, and I always pay people for their work. Martha, you don't need to. It's not charity, Frank. It's employment. I need help, you need work, and I pay fair wages for good work. $50 for the afternoon. Take it or leave it. Another long pause. All right then. I'll see you Sunday. That Sunday, Frank arrived early with a container of his mother's coleslaw and a renewed sense of purpose. He manned my grill like he owned it, sharing stories about his plant days with David and the other men. Gloria beamed as people raved about the coleslaw recipe. And Rachel? She arrived with a covered dish for the first time, a simple green salad, but made with love and presented with pride. As we gathered around the table that day, I realized that the most meaningful contributions often come without price tags. They arrive in the form of quiet check-ins, gentle concern, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. 6 months later, Frank found work as a part-time maintenance supervisor at the community college. It wasn't the same as his 43 years at the plant, but it came with dignity and a steady paycheck. The foreclosure notice disappeared from their door, replaced by Gloria's thriving vegetable garden that now supplies half our family gatherings. Rachel still works double shifts sometimes, but now it's by choice rather than desperation. Zoe made honor roll again and got accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship. She still checks her phone too much, but she also helps me with my tomato garden every weekend. And me? I learned that empty hands don't always mean empty hearts. Our family gatherings look different now. Frank has become our official grill master, arriving early with his toolbox to fix whatever needs fixing around my house. Gloria brings her famous coleslaw and usually stays late to help with dishes. Rachel contributes what she can. Sometimes it's a side dish, sometimes it's organizing games for the kids, sometimes it's just her presence and her willingness to listen. But the biggest change is in me. I've learned to see contribution in forms I never recognized before. The way Rachel remembers everyone's birthdays. How Frank always offers to help carry heavy things. The way Gloria compliments every dish like she's tasting it for the first time. How Zoe actually puts her phone away during family prayers. These are the lessons that changed my life. Family isn't about what you bring to the table. It's about making sure everyone has a seat at it. I spent so much time focusing on covered dishes that I missed the covered hearts sitting right in front of me. Pride and poverty often wear the same face. Frank's empty hands weren't about disrespect, they were about dignity. Sometimes the people who need help most are the least likely to ask for it. Love shows up in unexpected ways. While I was counting casseroles, Rachel was counting my heartbeats, making sure I was safe and cared for without ever making me feel like a burden. Judgment is a luxury we can't afford. Every time I assumed the worst about Rachel's family, I was choosing my own comfort over their humanity. The stories we tell ourselves about other people's motives are usually wrong. Real generosity is often invisible. Rachel was giving more than any of us her time, her money, her peace of mind. But because it didn't come in a covered dish, I couldn't see it. Today, as I write this, I'm preparing for another family barbecue. The dining room table is covered with food, but not all of it came from my kitchen. Frank's bringing his famous grilled corn, Gloria is making her 3-bean salad, and Rachel's contributing homemade dinner rolls that she learned to make from my own recipe. But more importantly, my heart is full in ways that have nothing to do with food. I have a daughter-in-law who loves my son completely, parents-in-law who've become true friends, and a granddaughter who calls me Grandma Martha and means it. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most ordinary moments. Sometimes the people we think are taking from us are actually the ones holding us up. And sometimes, the empty hands we judge so harshly are the same hands that catch us when we fall. I learned that family isn't measured by what people contribute to your table, it's measured by how much room you make in your heart. And my heart, I'm happy to say, has never been fuller.